You want to hear us listen?
Don't interrupt or
want to listen to us yell about politics?
Yeah.
Here's what I think.
Yeah.
2 things.
Okay.
I have a lot more than 2 things.
Of course.
With the GMO thing, Bernie Sanders, the thing that makes me the most nervous is that I think, like you said in a previous discussion that happened in a different dimension, that he forgets that his like the Democratic base nationwide and his constituents in Vermont are not necessarily always on the same page with stuff. And so the GMO thing, like I've said, I'm actually cool with the idea of labeling GMOs because I think that's just a consumer's thing, but I'm not afraid of GMOs.
Right.
But the problem is that my biggest fear is that even though I don't think he tries to, Bernie accidentally taps into conspiratorial leftist thought.
Sure.
Kind of often. And I think that it's because, for example, this notion that Hillary Clinton is little more than a corrupt bureaucrat is kind of like, I mean, okay, like that's clearly kind of true in like a broad American, like I wish that there wasn't as much money in politics and that I wish that like Wall Street wasn't as heavily represented, but there's clearly a stark difference between Hillary Clinton and basically anyone on the Republican side.
Well, but I mean they keep saying that in every debate, like they kind of both have a moment.
But it feels a little bit like...
Isn't it great that we're having this debate and not whatever those clowns are doing? So, I don't know. I just think, like, clearly this is like a Aaron Sorkin, West Wing kind of, like, playing out, like, the differences between an idealist in politics and a pragmatist.
But I think it goes beyond pragmatist into technocratic territory, which is, I think, what makes Democrats nervous as well, is that when you have the, the Tax Policy Center, the Economic Policy Center, who Democrats have relied on heavily for a long time to show the American people that their tax policies actually add up and the numbers make sense. Now, suddenly, you have the Bernie camp being like, well, they're just a bunch of, like... yahoos in Washington who don't understand the American people. And it's like, when the Democrats separating themselves from the purely centrist wing is something that is a lot less painful for Democrats than separating themselves from the technocratic wing, because I don't think they're always the same thing. I don't think that Paul Krugman is a centrist. But I do think that Paul Krugman is a technocrat and that he's very interested in making sure that when Democrats are proposing policies, that they make some sort of logical sense mathematically and that makes economists happy. And Bernie Sanders has seemed very uninterested in that. And one of the reasons why is because a lot of people in his base also don't care. Because they say, he writes for the New York Times, so he's also bought and paid for by like the corporate media. And it's kind of like... Sure, but he's also Paul Krugman. Like he's not like some dude who's writing stuff because that's what he gets paid for.
Well, and so this is why my whole thing about the Bernie Sanders campaign all along has been this is really representing like a growth in the progressive wing of the party, and whatever happens through the primaries, like that's constituency is still going to be there, and Hillary Clinton is going to have to appeal to them somehow.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I feel like the people who are really supporting Hillary in kind of a dismissive way about Sanders, like, don't see that part of it. That they're not going to go away. They're not going to.
I don't know if I see that though, because I feel like a lot of the conversation has been about how Hillary Clinton has shifted significantly to her own left. And you can't, you can't say that's anything beyond like, and I think that it's wrong to say.
I think that has a lot to do with Sanders being in the race.
I that's what I'm saying. I completely agree. I think it's impossible to imagine Hillary Clinton being the kind of candidate she is in this very moment without Bernie Sanders having not even just Bernie Sanders existing, but without Bernie Sanders having gotten as far as he's gotten.
Yeah. What was kind of the problem is that none of the other candidates in the Democratic Party really like showed up,
Right.
There's always been a far left kind of idealistic candidate. In 2008 we had Kucinich. And Kucinich was wacky, but like Sanders is like that person, but for some reason he just like got a following that was unmatched. Now, what do you think would happen though if Sanders does get the nomination? Do you think some of those far left, like, conspiratorial things will kind of fade away? Do you think he'll moderate a little bit, or do you think he's like stuck in his?
I think he's put himself in
in his democratic socialist. Not that that's the rut, but that like appealing to Vermont Democrats versus California Democrats.
So I think he's put himself in a tricky position because the reality of the electorate, independent of his political revolution rhetoric, the reality of the electorate is that if you want to win a general election, you have to actually represent maybe not a centrist point of view. Like I think Obama is pretty moderate, but he's still like more to the left, like legitimate left of this political spectrum than like Clinton was. He's not. Sure. He never positioned himself as like, I'm just like right there in the middle. He's always kind of been positioning himself as the liberal alternative to Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
But even with that, understanding that there's always been, when you're a moderate in the race, or when you're in the general electorate, you have to convince a lot of people who aren't as passionate about your ideological politics that you're still the guy for the job, or the woman for the job. And so that's why I think that Bernie Sanders, he has been so forceful on certain positions that when he gets into the general election, I mean, something that technocrats and pollsters bring up a lot is that, I mean, his basic idea of getting rid of insurance companies and doing single payer system, which like I'd be totally down for if it were feasible. But I do think that I'm part of the electorate that he needs to do a much better job convincing me that that's a feasible thing to do.
Right.
I mean, part of his plan is to raise taxes not only on the wealthy but on the middle class. And middle class people seeing you're going to have your taxes raised is like incredibly. I mean, that is like, you can just imagine the ads of like Bernie Sanders wants to raise your taxes.
Is that accurate though? Because
that's every single analysis of his policy that I've ever read says that his thing requires, and he's even gone on record saying that. And it makes perfect sense because what he says is, yes, I want to raise taxes even on the middle class, but that's because I'd be eliminating their insurance. Like, if you're not paying for healthcare...
Right, so it's an offset.
It completely offsets.
So, like, it's actually, most people would be...
probably paying less.
A decrease in taxes.
But that is still a really hard sell. Because telling people I'm raising your taxes... Because you got to remember... I mean, I'm talking like I'm a political scientist. I'm not a political scientist. I just read stupid articles on the internet. But one of the things that makes a lot of sense to me... is that when you're dealing with the general election, like, think about, even though it didn't get that far and Obama still won, think about you didn't build that. That was the most out-of-quote stupid or out-of-context stupid thing ever.
Yeah.
But the Republicans still ran like 1,400 ads that actually seemed to change certain people's perspective of Obama.
Right.
And that's because that's politics. That's like when you're in the general election, if you can get the wrong kind of soundbite. So can you just imagine... Bernie Sanders, he said in a debate, yes, I will raise taxes on the middle class, and the next sentence is, but that's because their health care will be provided by their government, so they won't be paying health care costs. They will cut that part out and just loop the other part.
I mean, Obama still won, even having said that.
He did. But another thing about Obama is that when you look at all of the analysis, the majority of Americans thought that Obama... There's like this great chart. It was in one of the books that was published like the day after the election or whatever. But it shows that like when people were asked whether or not they think Mitt Romney or Barack Obama more closely aligns with their political ideology, a majority of Americans were closer to Mitt Romney.
Right.
But the reason they voted for Obama is because they just liked Barack Obama more.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I don't think that Bernie Sanders has that kind of appeal.